Hey, remind me later, phone. I don't want your update that's going to make you work worse. Wait for this stream to pop up so I can do my audio test. And am I on? And okay, now let's get this shared out. Copy link, paste in the discords. Bear with me here a second. Not like we have any audience members yet anyway, but what am I? Yeah, I'm a little tired. But okay, so here we go. No one in here yet, but Last Samurai 20 years later, one of my all-time favorite films, directed by Edward Zwick, however it's pronounced. My history with this movie goes back to the end of my junior year in high school, going to see Matrix Reloaded in theater. There was a brief teaser for this. It looked really interesting, and I spent the rest of the year looking for it. It came out December 2003 during my senior year of high school, and I was just blown away by this movie. The story it told, how it told the story, the music, the performances, the cast, and I don't even really like Tom Cruise. And this is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a story about redemption, tradition, standing up for what's right. There's a lot of good stuff to just latch onto in this movie, and it's about something I'm fascinated in samurai. So it's a movie that was right out of my alley. I seen it on a Saturday, and it had actually just recently snowed. Hey, Lethal, would you having trouble on your phone? But I was just blown away. Like I said, it had just recently snowed. I don't know why that stuck with me, and I walked out of the theater thinking this is one of the best movies I've ever seen. Now, this is just a 20-year later discussion. I'm probably gonna do a review of it at some point, but I just wanted to celebrate 20 years of one of my favorite films of all time. What's on the menu? The film follows Nathan Algren, a survivor of Custard 7 Calvary, a man just tormented by the past. He was part of a massacre at an Indian village and he has nightmares about it. So, oh, that's good. I made some shrimp pasta tonight. He has nightmares and he's a drinker. He's working for Winchester Firearms and just basically selling rifles because he's considered a genuine hero. He gets fired at his performance for being drunk, and he gets approached by an old army buddy. Hey, I got this thing lined up. you'd be good for it, meets up with an old commander he doesn't like. Yeah, it's might be, I think it's probably my second favorite movie of all time. And at this point, Japan's trying to become civilized and they want to bring American military personnel in to train them. And they offer him 400 a month, but he wants 500 and he takes it. Now, again, this is historical fiction, although historically this stuff was going on. Just as a note of interest, back then, you really would not have brought in, people were not seeking American military experts. We were reconstructing from a civil war. We weren't anywhere near the world power we would be. If you wanted military experts, you would bring them in from places like England or Germany, places like that. Just I know it doesn't affect the movie. I just think it would be an interesting note. We get to Japan and we see Japan in this weird state of flux where some of the old is still in existence, but it's becoming new. And that's the crux of the conflict of this movie. The samurai are rebelling for very understanding reasons because the old ways are being rejected and in some cases outlawed. Centuries old traditions are no longer in practice and being done away with. And as someone who's more of an old fashioned type person, and I watched the old fashioned ways be done away with and forgotten about for in the name of progress, this, that, and the other, I can actually relate to the samurai heavy on this. And we get a nice scene where he meets with this translator who's studying this. Well, first of all, let me go to the scene where Algren meets the emperor, and he does meet the translator first, but he explains how ritualized meeting the emperor is and what an honor this is because there was a time when no commoner would have ever gotten the chance, and how don't speak unless you're spoken to. If he bows, you have to bow lower. And it's a nice scene when he meets the emperor and the emperor asks about the American Indians and he goes, is it true they wear feathers, they have no fear? And he tells them they're very brave. We get a nice discussion with Algren and some of the characters and the translators actually asking about Indians and scalping, and he gives him a very graphic depiction of what scalping is like. And they go to the training. Many of these Japanese soldiers being trained are conscripts who, until recently, have never even seen a firearm. Now, at this point in time, this is post Boshin Revolution in Japan. Any Rurouni Kenshin fan would be familiar with this time period. There was just recently a revolution that put the emperor in power because before that it was the shogunate who was in power, and in this case, it was the Tokugawa shogunate. So, for a couple hundred years, Japan was actually kind of ahead of European countries where the emperor, the monarch, was just a figurehead and not the political head of the country. And they actually kind of went back to some reverted back when they were already at something that would ultimately become a standard. So that's an interesting note. I like the way this blends history and fiction, but we see how poorly trained the these people are. Again, they wouldn't have even seen a firearm in their life until they joined or were conscripted into the military. And he's also learning about the rebel leader Katsumoto, played by the great Ken Watanabe, a fantastic actor. Now, this is historically accurate because Watanabe's character Katsumoto is loosely based on a real historical figure who did not use firearms because they he embraced the ways of old. It was because he couldn't get firearms. Samurai, contrary to popular belief, actually did use firearms. There were like matchlock samurai guns. You can historically look that up if you want. But we do find more out about Katsumoto and Nathan Algren to kind of prove a point at how poorly trained some of these people are. He tells tells one of the translators, "Tell this guy if he does not fire at me, I will shoot him." And the distance he's standing at isn't that far away. I confidently, not that I would want to have to make the shot and shoot at a person, but I can confidently say, had that been me, I know I could make the shot, but he's shooting at the guy panics, misses, and we see that not only one does Nathan have a death wish and he really doesn't care whether he lives or dies, but that he's proving a point that these people are not ready for combat. One of the military leaders is former samurai. He's a old man of small stature that nonetheless commands great respect, as the movie puts it, and they get go out and battle against the samurai, and the conscripts get slaughtered. Tom Cruise kills one samurai in the process. Well, he kills a few, but he kills one after getting wounded. And it actually kind of his how just resilient he is in battle and his resolve that he's just not going to be killed in the fight impresses Katsumoto and earns his respect. And Katsumoto decides, I can learn from this guy. So he's taken prisoner. They bind his wound. And he also sees the guy that was former samurai commit harakiri. And he, of course, to him, he looks at, which of course you can, yeah, that was cruel and barbaric looking at it, but he doesn't understand the cultural significance of it, unfortunately. Well, you know what I'm trying to say, but he doesn't understand how culturally important it is. So as so it's something that bothers him and it's something he
Talk back on. Menu. Talk back off.
sorry about that. I was checking something on my phone for a second. But he actually just doesn't understand it. And it's a nice moment that comes up later as they take him prisoner and he gets to talk. And we just have him kind of alone in this village. Only one person speaks English, and he begins to live and work among the samurai when he meets Katsumoto for the first time. And he brings up the incident with the one guy, and Katsumoto's kind of perplexed, and he goes, "Warriors in your country do not kill." He tells him, "No, they don't defeat the head off wound defeated kneeling men," and he explained it's basically the samurai way. He asked me to end his life like a samurai, and it was an honor of mine to help him with that, which was a nice little touch because again you're really seeing cultures learning from each other, and there's a lot of night and day with how Algren was raised and even what he learned from the Blackfoot versus what the samurai are like. One of my favorite scenes is a scene where he sees kids practicing with the wooden swords in the rain, and Katsumoto's nephew tells him they may be kids, but they're stronger than they look. He hands him a wooden sword and he begins sparring with the kid. And naturally, not that he's taking it seriously enough to hurt the kid because he doesn't, but he's able to just effortlessly just move around the kid. And Unjo, I think is how you pronounce it, who's one of the higher ups in the village, sees him. And we get this scene where he starts hitting him with the sword and knocking him down. And you can tell he has this absolute, just barely controlled hatred for Tom Cruise to the point where he almost you could tell he really wants to kill him, but he's holding back because he knows Katsumoto is planning on learning from him. And he just keeps hitting unnecessarily hard for what's a sparring session, but Nathan Algren keeps getting back up to the point where just he's so beaten he can barely stand. And we get a neat, I do love this part because there is so much said in this scene without any real speaking. And Ujo, he, if I'm pronouncing it right, I know I'm butchering it. He actually grabs the wooden sword and tosses it to Katsumoto's nephew. And it's a moment of, okay, I still hate you, but you have earned my respect because not a lot of people would keep getting back up from the beating I just gave you. So I respect you enough not to severely hurt you or outright kill you right now. And I also want to talk about another great asset to this film, the absolutely beautiful music by Hans Zimmer. It's epic, it's sorrowful. At times, the score sounds like it's crying. If you haven't seen the movie, if you don't know how beautiful this soundtrack is, it's beyond amazing. It's one of Hans Zimmer's best works, and it just so amplifies everything in the movie. And we get a lot of back and forth. Tom Cruise, he's a prisoner until spring. Then they're going to send him back on his way after the snow melts. And he begins to learn from and bond with the samurai. He has a bodyguard who I believe he calls Bob, who doesn't speak English, but he still talks to him. He's living in the home of the widow of the samurai he killed. And there's some nice emotional tension in that where she hates having the man that killed her husband in her home, even though a subtle romance does build between these two characters, which was very well done. And I love some of his commentary, like he's talking about the samurai people in his journal, and he says, from the moment they wake up, they perfect themselves. I mean, not perfect, from the moment they wake up, they dedicate themselves to the perfection of whatever it is they do. He talked about how he's never been a religious man, but there is something spiritual about this land. And we even see him stop drinking. Him and Katsumoto have a discussion, and he brings up the nightmares. And based on the warriors that have nightmares, something like they only regret what they've done. And we know, I can't even remember the name of the massacre he was at, but it was one in the history books. The village was just women and children, and that's what haunts him. There is a funny scene where Katsumoto asks about General Custer and how he brought like 2,000 men against like 3,000 angry braves. And he's like, I like this General Custard. And he tells him Custard was a lunatic that fell in love with his own legend. And him and his men got slaughtered. Katsumoto goes, it was a good death. And he tells him, well, maybe you can have one just like it someday if it's my destiny. It was a nice little moment. Again, I do like how subtle the friendship develops between these two characters because they're just learning from one another. It's a nice moment. And, I say there's, even though this is I hate to use, this is a character drama, so it's obviously a slower movie. Not that I feel like there's a slow moment in this movie, even though it does take its time. The scene where he starts learning English, I mean, Japanese is nice, and he's talking at the dinner table. And once he's able to break the ice with a few Japanese words he picks up, he's like able to grab something. What's this? You have the one kid, nose, ears, in telling him the words, and he just picks up English and Japanese, and he's slowly adapting to this culture. There's a nice scene where he's now integrated enough where he's training in swordsmanship with the samurai, and he's practicing against someone, and Katsumoto's nephew tells him, "You have too many minds. Your mind is on the sword. Your mind is on your opponent. Your mind is on the people around. Just focus on the opponent." And he does better when he does that. And he gets so good to the point where we see him having sparring practice with Ujo, and they're basically. Should I, hold on. They're like the samurai are basically taking bets on how many hits is he going to be defeated in this time. And it's like 5 this time. No, this time it'll be 6. And we see as he's training, he actually flashes in his mind to Ujo's pattern, and he sees an opening he can exploit. And what's neat about this fight too, you can tell he earned respect, because where before he was hitting him hard to take him down, if he hits him now, it's just firm enough to, I got you. It's not enough to purposely hurt or beat down or humiliate. And sure enough, they fight to a draw this time. And I like the moment with Ujo. He's both surprised and proud of how well he adapted to it. Tom Cruise, at one point, he even apologizes for killing the woman's husband, and she points out that's how a samurai's supposed to come out. You were doing your job, he was doing his, and I forgive you. And this is where the romance between the two, as subtle as it is, starts budding. During a kabuki show, there's an attack on the village by ninja, and Tom Cruise has to help fight them off, and he saves one of the widows. I can't remember her name, but he saves one of her kids. They go back because it's springtime. They go back to the city, and Katsumoto's nephew, there's a heart wrenching scene where not only do they take his sword, but they forcibly cut his hair. And it's the humiliation that this samurai that was once part of the noble class, part of Japan's military, is now just being publicly humiliated. Katsumoto's presenting himself to the emperor and gets held prisoner. We have this one guy, Omura, who you can tell he's trying to manipulate the emperor and grow his political power and grow Japan's power. And it just all comes to a head where Tom Cruise decides, I'm not going to take this. I'm going to help Katsumoto break out, and I'm going to help him fight this rebellion because it's the right thing to do. He actually takes the translator with him, which was a pretty nice. He basically gave him the chance to learn about the samurai directly. They have to rescue Katsumoto, and his nephew sadly gets killed, and they go back to the village. And we have them start preparing for war. There's a scene where he's talking to the widow, and her youngest son gets upset. And he's like, I know he's upset with me because I killed his father. And she's like, no, he's angry because he knows you're going to go off to fight and he doesn't want you to die. And there's a nice little moment where the kid's talking about their ways, and he's like, don't you get scared to go into battle? And he tells him every time, and it's a nice emotional moment. There's a good scene where he actually like gives some strategy suggestions to Katsumoto and tells him about the battle of, well, that comes later, but he brings up Thermopylae. And the morning when they get ready to go to battle, the well, there's a scene that evening, and I love how it's framed where the widow is in her room, Tom Cruise is in the middle room, and her husband's armor is in the other room. And it's like he's standing between her and the armor, and she knows what she has to do. And the next day, she calls him into the room and tells him, this was my husband's, and my family would be honored if you wear his armor into battle. And it's a beautifully done scene again with Hans Zimmer's score, which is absolutely a character in this movie. And it's a very sad and emotional scene because she believes for the second time in her life she's dressing the man she's in love with so he can go off and die. And another moment I like is when he comes out in the armor and Ujo sees him. Now, if this had happened right early on with the wooden sword scene, Ujo would have killed him dead on the spot. But he just kind of looks at him, checks the armor, and it's one of those, yeah, it looks good on you moments. And you could see he's actually extremely proud to see Algren in that armor and fight as one of them. It comes to the battle, and like the Japanese army outnumber the samurai. Tom Cruise is like, we need to get in close and take away the advantage of their blades. And they do have a nice plan where they retreat from the cannons, lure the soldiers in, and use arrows and fire traps and go in close. Sadly, Bob, who was always guarding Tom Cruise, he actually takes a bullet for him in this. And we have the cavalry ride in, and just we have a this battle scene is just amazing. And again, Hans Zimmer's score, which at times sound like it's crying, and this is a beautiful battle, but it's also just heart wrenching to watch because we're seeing, even though they're get, killing more soldiers than would be expected, we're watching these samurai we have grown to love and care about throughout the movie get killed. And it comes down to there's just a few left, and they decide to. Oh, there's also the cavalry charge with Ujo's men leading up to this, but they decide to just ride and charge into the men. Now, Tom Cruise's the officer that was ahead of him, he tells him, if you fight with them, no quarter. And Tom Cruise goes, I'll look for you on the battlefield. And he gets to kill him on the battlefield, but the samurai are getting gunned down more and more. And at this point, it's, are we going to die fighting, or are we going to die in prison or be executed? And they're charging up to the officers at this point, and they have to use the Gatling gun. And again, you have Hans Zimmer's music. They're panicking, trying to load the Gatling gun. In the moment the cartridge goes in, the music stops for a moment before an even sadder piece of music comes in, and it guns most of them down. Katsumoto and Algren are still alive, and Katsumoto wants to die like a samurai, and he I left some parts out, but I'm going to get to one of my favorites in a minute. But he tells him, you have found your honor, let me die with mine. And Tom Cruise helps him commit seppuku. And it's this emotional scene where Katsumoto's so weak he can't drive the blade into himself. So Algren has to do it for him, and he has to literally prop his friend up as he's dying so he doesn't hit the ground before he dies. And it's a really emotional scene in this movie. And we get and it just affects everyone on the battlefield. We get to the scene with the Emperor where they're about to close the weapons deal and the Weasel is getting his way. Umora and Tom Cruise walks in and he has a sword and he pulls it out and holds it up to the Emperor and he goes, "This was Katsumoto's sword. He would have wanted you to have it to remember his ancestors that held this and what they died for." And the Emperor picks it up, and at this point, the Emperor comes across as kind of skittish, not skittish, but just naive, almost weak and frail. And when he's looking at the sword and remember, he grabs it, and we see a strength come from him. And I've dreamed of a unified Japan. We have modern clothing, modern this, modern that, but this deal is not good for Japan. He goes, "What good is progress if we forget where we come from?" Almost 20 years later, and it's heartbreaking how people to this day don't understand that. We've progressed so much in society, but we've forgotten so much about where we've come from. So, yeah, that scene does hit really close to home. And he tells them, "I don't want your weapons." And they leave, and Umora is protesting. He's like, "I've done these things for our people, this and that." And the Emperor's like, "Well, then, if you're doing it for the people, you wouldn't mind if I took away your family's assets and gave them to the people." And then he protests some more. And the Emperor says, "If you feel I have dishonored you, I offer you this sword," basically telling him what to do with it. And Umura just stumbles backing out of the room. His power over the Emperor is over. And the Emperor goes up to Algren and asks him, "Tell me how Katsumoto died." And he looks up at him and says, "I will tell you how he lived." Which it says a lot about the character. You can't tell how a man like Katsumoto died without telling how he lived. And you get a narration at the end. Some talk about what may or may not have happened to Algren, and it goes, some say he died of his wounds, others that he went to America. But I like to think he found that small measure of peace everyone looks for, but few people find. And we see he returns to the village and to the family he now has. And I think it's a really beautiful and emotional ending. My favorite part in it, and it's why I didn't talk about it in the movie, as they're getting ready to go out and fight. This the swordsmith handed Katsumoto a sword, and after Tom Cruise comes out in the armor, he gives it to him, and Tom Cruise unsheathes it, and it has writing on it. And he asks, "What does it say?" And he tells him, "I'm not I don't remember word for word, but the gist of it is, I belong to the warrior who the ways of old have become one with the ways of new." And it says it all in what he saw in Algren, who was an outsider, that if a modern outsider can adapt and learn from their ways, that there is that it proves that we can have progress as a society, but we can still hold on to and embrace our past, embrace our old traditions that have stood the test of time. And he's gifting that to Algren because he sees he's actually the hope for that dream. Katsumoto believes his rebellion is in service of the Emperor. Like 20 years later, this film is every bit as good as I remember. It's gotten even better. It was one of the best films I've ever seen back in 2003, and it's one of the best films I've ever seen to this date. It's a story that's been done several times before, but it's a story that's been done so well. It was so masterfully crafted, you don't care that it's been done several times before. It has great costume design. Now, from what I understand, the samurai armor was more from an older time period and not so much accurate to what samurai would have wore back then. However, this period samurai armor they wore does look more theatrical. It looks better on camera. So, as far as historical inaccuracies in this, I'm fine with it if it looks better on camera. This is historical fiction, so we don't have to hold it under the same microscope as something that is supposed to be 100% historical. And it's a phenomenal film. Didn't do I don't think it I don't know what it did remember what it did at the Academy Awards. Hold on. Did The Last Samurai win any Academy Awards? Best Supporting Actor nominee Ken Watanabe. I thought he deserved that. Best Production Design, Best Costume Design. In fairness, Lord of the Rings deserved that one. Best Sound Mixing. It amazes. That's kind of amazing in itself that this was not nominated for Best Picture, which after seeing Return of the King, we all knew that was a slam dunk for Return of the King, but for this film to not even be nominated, were they asleep at the wheel? But Last Samurai, that's pretty much all I have to say, and I'm getting just really tired. I haven't been sleeping well, and it's been catching up to me. I'm gonna try and keep this up for a few more minutes, but this film it came out at a very interesting time in my life. I was a senior in high school, and I knew a chapter of my life was ending, and to be honest, I was scared to death of it. I was fixing to move on to adulthood and move out of, as much as we don't like school, first, I spent the last 12 years of my life in school. Well, post 13, 14, if you count middle school and preschool. And it was just, there was a weird feeling knowing I was moving away from that time in my life. Now, at the time, I couldn't have known how much my life was going to change over the next few months, and that before the end of the year, I would no longer be in New Jersey. I would be in North Carolina. If you told me 20 years ago I'd be living in North Carolina and I'd actually be talking about a movie live on the internet, I would have called you crazy. In this movie, it brings me back to that time period. When I watch it, not only do I feel the emotions that the film gives me, but I feel those emotions I felt back then of knowing I was at the end of a chapter in my life. And it's, to me, it's for that, it's a very, very personal movie that is just so, it's been my one of my favorites ever since I seen it, but it is so intertwined into that aspect. I mean, not that aspect, that time of my life, and just, the memories it does bring back. That it's also, it's a very, like I said, personal movie. It's very special. It's all the more sadder knowing we don't get movies like that. It's still kind of hard to wrap my head around that this June I will have graduated high school 12 years ago. And I know I'm just rambling now, but it's something this movie stirred up in me when I watched it tonight. And that's something, that's the power that entertainment has, how something can bring you back to that, back to a certain time in your life, or how you can watch a movie and be like, and just relate with certain characters. Like, I'm not Japanese, I'm not samurai, but I'm more of an, I said it earlier, I'm more of an old school type person. I believe in older values and traditions, and it's not pleasant seeing those values and traditions being forgotten about and washed away. So even though I'm not Japanese and I will never be a samurai, I can 100% relate to, these samurai. I'm getting tired. I've not slept good all weekend. Even though I had a good night's sleep last night, it's clearly worn off, and I have a lot of catching up I need to do. But The Last Samurai, to me, it was a 10 out of 10 movie back in 2003, and it's still a 10 out of 10 movie. Lethal, thanks for stopping by. Anyone watching this after the fact, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. And I'm going to go get some sleep. Over and out.